Drop the cane or I'll break it myself, old man. Despite his own warning, Officer Nicholas Millward didn't wait. He tore the white and red cane from Joseph Desmond's hand and snapped it over his knee. The mahogany handle, shaped by his late wife to fit his grip, hit the pavement and skidded into the gutter. Then, in one brutal motion, Officer Millward yanked Joseph's arms back and cinched the cuffs tight on his wrist, shoving him toward the cruiser. Joseph said nothing and complied, because he had survived 71 years by knowing which battles to fight and where. What Officer Millward didn't know was that Joseph's son had made a career of exposing moments like this, and somewhere beyond the reach of those closing cuffs, that reckoning was already beginning. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The jacket was the first thing. Joseph Desmond always wore his good jacket on Tuesdays, the dark navy one with the brass buttons that Regina had bought him for their 40th anniversary. He'd found it in the closet by feel, third hanger from the left, always, and pulled it on slowly, smoothing the lapels the way he used to when he could still see himself in the mirror. He couldn't see anything now, hadn't for 6 years, but he still smoothed the lapels. He stood at his apartment door on the 4th floor of a building on 118th Street in Harlem, New York, and did what he did every Tuesday morning. He patted his coat pocket. Pharmacy list, folded in thirds. Exact change for the barber shop. 14 $, 2 5s, and 4 1s, organized by denomination the way Regina had taught him when the darkness first came. His white and red mobility cane leaned against the doorframe. He picked it up, feeling the smooth mahogany handle settle into his palm like a handshake from an old friend. Regina had made that handle, sanded it herself, fitted it to the exact curve of his grip. 2 years gone, and he still carried her every Tuesday. Joseph stepped into the hallway, pulled the door shut behind him, and began moving toward the elevator with the easy confidence of a man who had walked this same path 600 times. Every bump in the carpet, every loose floorboard outside apartment 4C. He knew all of it. The darkness didn't scare him anymore. The root was in his bones. Outside, October had arrived the way October does in New York. Sharp air, the smell of roasting nuts from a cart somewhere up the block, kids' voices cutting through the morning on their way to school. Joseph's cane swept in steady arcs ahead of him as he turned south on Lenox Avenue, navigating the familiar cracked stretch of sidewalk near the corner where the city had been meaning to do repairs for 3 years. "Morning, Mr. Joseph," Clarence called out from behind his fruit stand, already arranging apples in neat rows. "Morning, Clarence," Joseph said without breaking stride. "Your voice sounds tired. You sleep last night?" Clarence laughed. "Man, how do you do that?" Joseph just smiled and kept walking. This was his neighborhood. He'd been a principal at a school 6 blocks away for 22 years. He'd buried neighbors here and watched their grandchildren be born. He'd walked these streets before the darkness came, and he'd walked them after, and no one was going to tell him otherwise. He was 2 blocks from the pharmacy when he heard the car door. Not the sound itself, just the specific heaviness of it. The way a cruiser door closes different from a regular car. Joseph had learned to notice that. He kept walking, cane sweeping, not breaking his pace, because he had nothing to break it for. "Hey!" Joseph kept walking. The voice hadn't specified a direction. "Hey, you!" He stopped. He turned his head toward the sound. He kept his face calm. He kept his hands still. The officer was maybe 30 feet away. Joseph could hear the boots on the pavement, heavy, deliberate, closing the distance without hurry. The kind of walk that expected something. "Where are you going with that?" the officer said. Joseph held the cane slightly out to the side so it was visible. "Morning, officer," he said. "I'm visually impaired. This is a standard mobility cane. I'm on my way to the pharmacy on 125th. He kept his voice even. He'd learned that, too, over 71 years. Keep the voice even. Give them nothing to grab onto. The officer stopped close. Too close. Joseph could smell the coffee on him. "You live around here?" "I do, 118th Street. I walk this route every Tuesday." There was a pause. The kind of pause that isn't really a pause. It's a decision being made. "You got ID on you?" Joseph reached slowly into his interior pocket and produced his wallet. He held it out. The officer didn't take it. "What's your name?" "Joseph Desmond." "Joseph." The officer said it like it tasted like something he didn't like. "You want to tell me why you were swinging that thing around like you were about to hit somebody?" Joseph was quiet for 1 second. 1 single second. "I was navigating a broken stretch of sidewalk," he said. Still calm, still even. That's what a cane does. The morning kept going around them. Clarence was still arranging apples up the block. A school bus rumbled past. The city did not notice or care. "Sir," Joseph said quietly, "is there something I can help you with?" The officer's name was Nicholas Millward, and he had already decided the answer was yes. Nicholas Millward was 34 years old and had been a cop for 9 of them. He had 3 civilian complaints buried in his file like seeds that nobody wanted to water. He had a promotion he didn't get last week and a sergeant who'd embarrassed him in the locker room in front of 6 other officers. He had cold coffee in the cup holder of his cruiser and a chip on his shoulder the size of a city block. And right now, he had Joseph Desmond standing in front of him on a public sidewalk. And something about that, about the way Joseph stood, about the quiet dignity in the old man's posture, about the calm in his voice that refused to crack, was making Millward's jaw tighten in a way he couldn't quite explain. "Drop the stick," Millward said. Joseph didn't move. "Sir, this is a mobility aid. I am legally blind. Removing this cane leaves me without any means of—" "I said drop it." Officer Randy Osmar, 29 years old and 3 months out of his probationary period, stood back near the passenger side of the cruiser. He watched. He didn't say anything. He would keep not saying anything for the entire duration of what followed, and that silence would follow him for the rest of his career. "Officer," Joseph said, his voice still measured, still even, still refusing to give Millward the reaction he was fishing for. "I am a 71-year-old blind man on his way to pick up a prescription. I am not a threat to you. I am not a threat to anyone. You were swinging that thing at people. I was navigating a broken sidewalk. Stop arguing with me." "I am explaining myself," Joseph said. "There is a difference." Millward stepped forward and grabbed the cane. It happened fast. His hand closed around the shaft just below Joseph's grip, and he pulled. Joseph's hand tightened, not from resistance, not from defiance, but from something so deep and automatic, it bypassed thought entirely. Take away the cane, and Joseph was standing in the middle of a city sidewalk with no way to know where the curb was, where the wall was, where anything was. His hand had been trained by 6 years of necessity to hold on. His hand held on. "Let go," Millward said, his voice dropping low and mean. "Let go right now." "Please," Joseph started. Millward ripped the cane free, and then he broke it. He brought it down over his raised knee like he was snapping a piece of kindling for a fire. The sound was a crack, sharp and ugly and final. The mahogany handle, Regina's handle, sanded smooth by Regina's hands, fitted to the curve of Joseph's palm by the woman who had loved him for 43 years, separated from the shaft and bounced off the concrete sidewalk. Joseph went completely still, not frozen with fear, still in a different way. Still, the way a man goes still when something is taken from him that cannot be given back. His hand was open now, empty, and he held it at his side like he didn't quite know what to do with it. Up the block, Clarence had stopped arranging his apples. 3 people had their phones out. A woman in a green coat was already talking loudly. "What is wrong with you? He's blind! He's blind!" But her voice seemed to be coming from very far away. "Turn around," Millward said. "Hands behind your back." "What?" Joseph said. It wasn't protest, it was genuine disbelief. "You heard me. Turn around. You're under arrest." "For what?" "Assaulting an officer. Resisting arrest." The words landed like a physical thing. Joseph stood there for a moment, and in that moment his face did something complicated, something that moved through disbelief and pain and landed somewhere older and harder and sadder, like he had hoped, after 71 years, that the world had changed enough that he wouldn't be standing here again. It hadn't. He turned around. He put his hands behind his back. He let the cuffs go on without another word, because he was Joseph James Desmond, and he had survived things that would have broken men half his age, and he was not going to give Nicholas Millward the satisfaction of seeing him break now. Millward walked him to the cruiser and pushed him into the back seat, not gently. The door slammed. Joseph sat in the darkness, which was the same darkness as always, the darkness he lived in every day, except this darkness smelled like plastic and sweat and old coffee, and somewhere behind him on the sidewalk, in 2 pieces on the cold concrete, was the last thing Regina's hands had ever made for him. The ride to the 28th precinct took 11 minutes. Joseph knew because he counted. It was something he'd learned to do after losing his sight. Measure the world in time when he couldn't measure it in distance. 11 minutes in the back of a cruiser with his hands cuffed behind him, no seatbelt, no cane, no way to brace himself when Millward took corners too fast. The plastic seat was hard and cold. The cage divider in front of him smelled like someone else's fear. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say to these men that they were willing to hear. He thought about Regina instead. He thought about her hands working that piece of mahogany on the kitchen table, the sound of the sandpaper going back and forth in long, smooth strokes, while he sat across from her and pretended to read. He thought about her measuring his grip with a piece of string, serious as a surgeon. "I'm going to make sure it fits you right," she'd said. "You're going to carry it every day. It needs to feel like yours." It had. It always had. He pressed his lips together and looked straight ahead into the dark. The booking area of the 28th precinct was loud the way police stations are always loud. Phones, voices, the buzz of fluorescent lights that never quite settled into silence. A desk sergeant named Wilson looked up when Millward brought Joseph in, assessed the situation in about 2 seconds, and looked back down at his paperwork. Millward walked Joseph to the processing desk like he was delivering a package. "Assaulting an officer," he said to nobody in particular. "Resisting." "He's got no cane," Osmar said quietly, from somewhere behind Millward. "He'll survive." A younger officer near the far wall glanced over. He looked at Joseph, the good jacket, the steady posture, the empty hand that kept opening and closing slightly, without Joseph seeming to notice, and then looked away. Millward leaned against the counter while Joseph was processed. He was relaxed now. The tight-wound energy from the street had loosened into something worse, something easy and casual and entertained. "You see the way he was holding on to that thing?" Millward said to Osmar, loud enough to carry. He held up his own hand and mimicked a trembling grip. Then he let his eyes go vacant and swayed slightly, mocking the unsteady walk of a blind man. 2 officers laughed. One of them laughed too hard. Osmar made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite a protest, and wasn't quite anything at all. Desk Sergeant Wilson looked up. "Millward." "He need disability paperwork filed?" Millward waved a hand. "Just process him. Policy says if the subject is visually—" "I said process him, Wilson." Wilson held Millward's gaze for 1 second. Then he looked back down at his form and kept writing. The paperwork that should have been filed was not filed. The accommodation that should have been made was not made. Joseph stood at the processing desk and said nothing. His face gave nothing away. But his right hand, the one that had held Regina's cane every day for 2 years, stayed open at his side, empty, like it was still waiting. 40 minutes earlier, a 22-year-old nursing student named Kelly Brown had posted a 47-second video to her social media account with the caption, "They arrested a blind man and broke his cane." In broad daylight. Somebody share this. 200,000 people shared it. One of them was Reverend Charlotte Luther. Charlotte Luther was 66 years old and had been organizing this community since before Millward was born. She ran the Wednesday food pantry at First Missionary Baptist. She had the mayor's personal cell number and wasn't afraid to use it. She had buried 3 members of her congregation who died waiting for justice that never came, and she had decided a long time ago that she was going to be the reason that stopped happening on her watch. She watched the video twice. Then she called Jamie Hennard. Jamie Hennard, 48 years old, civil rights attorney, had successfully sued the NYPD twice and was widely known in the department's legal office as someone they did not want to see walking through a door. She answered on the second ring, listened for 45 seconds, and said, "I'll meet you there." Within the hour, Reverend Luther was at the front desk of the 28th Precinct, with 8 community members at her back and Jamie Hennard beside her, with a briefcase and an expression like a closed fist. A local news van had pulled up outside. The camera was already rolling. The desk sergeant picked up his phone. Captain Gordon Norwell came downstairs 3 minutes later. He was 58 years old, silver-haired, with the careful face of a man who had spent 30 years learning exactly how much to reveal and when. He stepped into the lobby and took it all in without appearing to. The news camera on the sidewalk, the community members filling the waiting area, the attorney with her briefcase standing at the desk like she owned the floor beneath her feet. His expression did not change, but the decision was already made. Captain Norwell pulled Millward into a side hallway and spoke to him in a low, flat voice for 90 seconds. Nobody heard what was said. But when Millward came back out, the casual ease he'd been carrying since the booking desk was gone, replaced by something tighter, smaller. He walked back to the processing area without making eye contact with anyone. The charges against Joseph Desmond were dropped. The official reason, entered into the system by a desk sergeant who wrote it without comment, was insufficient grounds for arrest. No apology was issued. No explanation was offered to Joseph directly. Captain Norwell returned to the lobby and delivered a brief, carefully constructed statement to Reverend Luther and Jamie Hennard about a procedural review that would be conducted thoroughly and taken very seriously. He used the word committed 4 times in 6 sentences. Jamie Hennard wrote nothing down. She didn't need to. She'd heard versions of this speech before. Different mouth, same words, same meaning, which was, "Please go away." She had no intention of going away. Joseph's belongings were returned to him in a plastic tray. His wallet, his pharmacy list, still folded in thirds, his $14, still organized by denomination. And finally, one evidence bag containing 2 pieces of broken white and red cane, the mahogany handle separated cleanly from the shaft, like something that had been alive and wasn't anymore. Joseph picked up the evidence bag with both hands. He held it carefully, the way you hold something fragile, even though what was inside was already broken, and there was nothing left to protect. Reverend Luther appeared at his elbow. She didn't say anything right away. She just put her hand on his arm and stood there. which was sometimes the only true thing a person could offer. "I've got you," she said quietly. "Let's get you home." Outside, the October air hit cold and clean. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Neighbors, people who'd seen the video, people who'd simply been walking by and stopped when they saw what was happening. When Joseph came through the precinct doors, guided by Reverend Luther's arm, someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then the whole sidewalk was clapping. And a woman near the back was crying, and the news camera was recording all of it. Joseph stood on the top step and held the evidence bag against his chest. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He lifted his face slightly, the way he always did when he was listening hard for something, and he let the sound of those people wash over him for a moment. Just a moment. Then he let Reverend Luther guide him down the steps toward the street. Jamie Hennard stopped at the bottom of the steps and turned to face the camera directly. Her voice was clear and steady and carried across the sidewalk without effort. "What happened to Joseph Desmond this morning was not a mistake," she said. "It was excessive force against a disabled man. It was a civil rights violation, and it will be treated as exactly that. We will be filing a formal civil complaint, and we will not be accepting any settlement that doesn't acknowledge the full truth of what occurred here today." The camera stayed on her. She meant every word. Marvin brought Joseph home and sat him in his armchair. Joseph placed the evidence bag on the coffee table in front of him. Then he reached inside, carefully, and removed the 2 pieces of the cane. He set them down side by side, the mahogany handle on the left, the shaft on the right, arranged with the kind of care that had nothing to do with hoping they could be fixed. He just needed them to be together. He sat with his hands on his knees and his face toward the window, and the afternoon light came through the glass and fell across him and across the broken pieces on the table, and the apartment was very quiet. That evening, Captain Gordon Norwell sat alone in his office on the 2nd floor of the 28th Precinct and opened his laptop. He navigated to the Secure Watch Systems portal, the city's contracted cloud security server that stored the precinct's internal camera footage. He located the booking area recording from that morning. His user account accessed the file at 7:42 p.m. By 7:44 p.m., it had been flagged as corrupted. By morning, both neighborhood witnesses who had given initial statements to the responding officers had been contacted. Both recanted, citing misremembering. At 8:15 p.m., City Attorney Paula Fenton called Jamie Hennard's office. Her voice was smooth and practiced and warm in the way that expensive things sometimes are. "We'd like to discuss a resolution," she said. "The city is prepared to offer Mr. Desmond $18,000, along with a confidentiality agreement, to bring this matter to a close." Jamie Hennard wrote the number down on a yellow legal pad. She drew a circle around it. "I'll convey it to my client," she said. She hung up and looked at the number for a long moment. Then she drew a line through it. The safe house was a rented townhouse in Baltimore, with blackout curtains and bad plumbing, and a folding table in the living room covered in surveillance photographs, call logs, and cold takeout containers. Marvin Desmond had been sitting at that table for 16 hours straight. He was good at this. Patient in a way that most people weren't built for. The kind of patient that came not from calm, but from discipline, from training himself, over 20 years, to hold still when everything in him wanted to move. His coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago. He hadn't noticed. At 9:17 a.m., his phone buzzed on the table beside a stack of printed transcripts. He glanced at the screen. Not his father's number. His father called at 8 every morning, without fail. This was Reverend Luther. He picked up. Reverend Luther. She told him everything. She told him about the video, the arrest, the broken cane, the precinct, the dropped charges, the crowd outside. She told him about the $18,000 offer, and the confidentiality agreement. She told him about the two witnesses who had recanted overnight and the security footage that had been quietly flagged as corrupted by mourning. Then she said, "Marvin, they broke Regina's cane." The room kept going around him. His colleagues moved between the table and the kitchen. Someone's radio crackled. Someone laughed at something on the other side of the room. Marvin set the phone face down on the table. He sat there for 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds, which was all he allowed himself. Then he picked the phone back up. "I'll call you back, Reverend." He stood and walked to where his supervisor, Special Agent in Charge Dexter Sanford, was standing by the window reviewing a surveillance log. "I need personal leave," Marvin said. "Effective now." Sanford looked up. He was a practical man who did not waste time on unnecessary reactions. "We're 16 hours into a build that's taken 8 months, Desmond. I need you at that table." "My father was arrested this morning," Marvin said. "He's 71 years old. He's been blind for 6 years. An officer broke his mobility cane and handcuffed him on a public sidewalk." Sanford studied him. "Is he hurt?" "Not physically." "Then I need you at that table." The room had gone quiet in the way rooms do when people are pretending not to listen. Marvin said, "They broke Regina's cane." Nobody in that room had known Regina Desmond, but they had all worked alongside Marvin long enough to know what those words meant. The way he said them, the particular stillness that came over his face when he did. Sanford looked at him for a long moment. 2 weeks, Sanford said. "Don't embarrass the Bureau." Marvin drove to New York that night. 4 hours on I-95 with the radio off, and the windows cracked and his mind working the way it always worked. Methodically, carefully, building the problem from the ground up. He was an FBI agent. He had no jurisdiction over local police misconduct. If he walked into this as Marvin Desmond's son, he was just another angry family member with a grievance and no leverage. If he used his badge carelessly, he handed the city's attorneys exactly what they needed. A federal agent interfering in a civil matter for personal reasons, tainting every complaint, every witness, every piece of evidence. He couldn't be reckless. His father had raised him to understand that the difference between justice and revenge was precision. But there was something else Reverend Luther had mentioned, almost as an aside, near the end of the call. She'd said it the way people say things they think are small when they are actually everything. Millward had 3 prior complaints, all from black residents in his patrol area. All filed. All buried. All settled under confidentiality agreements. Marvin drove and thought about that. 3 prior complaints meant a pattern. A pattern, documented and provable, was the difference between one bad morning and a systemic civil rights violation. That was the road to federal jurisdiction. That was the thread he needed to find. He pulled up outside his father's building on 118th Street at 11 o'clock at night. The neighborhood was quiet. A few windows lit up, the bodega on the corner still open. Someone's music drifting down from a high floor somewhere. Marvin sat in the car for a moment. He pressed his hands flat on the steering wheel and breathed. Then he went upstairs. His father's apartment door was unlocked, the way it always was when Joseph was expecting him. Marvin pushed it open and stepped inside. One lamp on in the corner. The smell of the apartment, coffee and old books, and something else he'd never been able to name, that was simply the smell of home. Joseph was in his armchair, awake. His hands rested on his knees, and on the coffee table in front of him, in 2 pieces, lay what was left of Regina's cane. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Joseph said, "You didn't have to come all this way." "Yes, I did," Marvin said. He sat down across from his father, pulled the yellow legal pad from his bag, and uncapped his pen. He wasn't leaving until this was done. They sat across from each other in the quiet apartment, father and son, the broken cane between them on the coffee table like evidence of something that hadn't been resolved yet. Marvin had his legal pad open. His pen was uncapped, but he wasn't writing anything yet. He was watching his father. Joseph's hands were folded on his knees. His face was turned slightly toward the window, the way it always was, not because there was anything to see, but because that was where the sounds came in. The neighborhood settling into night. A distant siren. Someone's television through a thin wall. "You're trying to figure out how to fix it," Joseph said. "I am. Without breaking anything else in the process." Marvin looked at him. "That's exactly right." Joseph was quiet for a moment. Then he reached forward and touched the broken cane with one hand. Just rested his fingers on it, lightly, the way you touch something you're saying goodbye to. "The law is a tool, Marvin," he said. "You know how a tool can be used right, and how it can be used wrong." He lifted his hand from the cane and settled back into the chair. "Use it right." Marvin wrote that down, word for word, on the first line of the legal pad. He looked at it for a second. Then he drew a line under it and started working. The next morning, Marvin called Adrienne Washington from the sidewalk outside his father's building. He kept his voice low and his back to the street. Adrienne Washington had spent 20 years at the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and she'd built more systemic police misconduct cases than anyone in the department's recent history. She was methodical, precise, and allergic to shortcuts. She was also the only person Marvin trusted completely to tell him the truth when the truth was inconvenient. "I need to talk through a situation," he said. "I figured," she said. "I saw the video." He told her everything. The arrest, the cover-up already taking shape, the witnesses who'd recanted, the footage flagged as corrupted within hours. Then he told her about the 3 prior complaints against Millward. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "Marvin, one incident, regardless of how egregious, rarely opens a federal civil rights investigation against an individual officer. You know that." "I know. What we need is a pattern. Documented. Provable. Those 3 buried complaints are your foundation. But we need to show more than that they existed. We need to show that Norwell knew about them and actively worked to make them disappear. Deliberate institutional suppression. That's the federal hook." "That's what I thought." "And Marvin," she said, "you cannot work this with your badge. If the city's attorneys find out an FBI agent is personally running down witnesses in a case involving his own father, they will use that to discredit everything, every statement, every complainant, every piece of evidence you touch." "I know," he said again. "I'm working this as a private citizen." A pause. "That's a hard line to walk." "My father's been walking hard lines his whole life," Marvin said. "I think I can manage." He heard her exhale. "Find those 3 complainants. Get their stories documented through Jamie Hennard's office, not through you. Give me something I can take upstairs that doesn't have your fingerprints on it." "Understood. Thank you, Adrienne." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "And, Marvin, be careful. Norwell didn't get to captain by being careless. He's already 3 moves ahead of where you think he is." Marvin went back upstairs. His father had made coffee and was sitting at the kitchen table with the radio on low. A jazz station, the kind Regina had always favored. Marvin poured himself a cup and stood at the counter, looking at his legal pad. 3 names. That was where this started. The first was Thomas Rupert, 67 years old, a retired postal worker from the Bronx who had filed a complaint against Millward 26 months ago and settled. The second was Cassandra Reyes, 58, a woman from Washington Heights who'd been stopped outside her church and had withdrawn her complaint after filing it. The third had moved out of state, current location unknown. He started with Thomas. That afternoon, Jamie Hennard formally rejected Paula Fenton's $18,000 settlement offer on Joseph's behalf. She sent the rejection in writing, by certified mail, with a single line beneath the refusal that read, "My client intends to pursue full accountability through every available legal channel." Fenton received the letter at 3:45 p.m. By 4 p.m., she was already making calls. Marvin didn't know that yet, but he would. Thomas Rupert lived on the third floor of a walk-up in the Bronx, on a street where half the storefronts had their gates pulled down even in the middle of the day. Marvin found the building without trouble and climbed the stairs slowly, thinking about what he was walking into. He wasn't a federal agent today. He was just a man knocking on a door. He knocked. It took a moment. Then the sound of careful footsteps, the kind that approach a door without committing to opening it. A pause. Then the chain sliding, the deadbolt turning, and the door opening about 8 inches, enough for one eye and half a face. Thomas Rupert was 67 years old. He had the broad shoulders of a man who'd spent decades hauling mail sacks, and the careful, watchful eyes of someone who'd learned the hard way that unexpected visitors rarely meant good news. "Mr. Rupert," Marvin said, "my name is Marvin Desmond. My father is Joseph Desmond. I think you may have seen the video." The eyes studied him. Then the door opened the rest of the way. The apartment was tidy in the particular way of a man living alone who takes pride in order. A recliner positioned in front of the television. Plants in the window, recently watered. A photograph on the wall of a younger Thomas in his postal uniform, grinning wide, standing next to a woman who shared his eyes. Thomas sat in the recliner and folded his hands and looked at Marvin, the way a man looks at someone he wants to trust, but has learned not to. "I know why you're here," he said. "Then you know what I'm going to ask." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Millward stopped me outside the Associated on Morris Avenue," he said finally. 26 months ago. Middle of the day. I had 2 grocery bags in my hands." He looked at his hands now, as if he could still feel the bags. "He said I matched a description. He wouldn't tell me what description. He told me to put the bags down, and when I asked why, he put his hand on my chest and pushed me into the wall." The room was very quiet. "I filed the complaint the same day," Thomas continued. "Wrote down everything while it was still fresh. Dates, times, badge number, everything." He paused. 3 days later, somebody from the city attorney's office called my daughter's job. Her supervisor got a call, asking questions, professional questions, the kind designed to make an employer nervous. Marvin didn't move. And then? And then my daughter called me crying, asking me what was going on, asking if she was going to lose her job. Thomas's voice didn't break, but it got very flat. I settled for $9,000 and signed their paper, and I have not spoken about it since. He looked at Marvin directly. "I cannot go through that again. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about your father. I watched that video, and I felt sick to my stomach because I know exactly what that man was feeling on that sidewalk. I know it in my bones." His jaw tightened. "But I cannot put my daughter back in that position. I won't." Marvin nodded slowly. He didn't push. He thanked Thomas Rupert, stood, and left. He was standing outside on the sidewalk, hands in his jacket pockets, when his phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline read, "Joseph Desmond, arrested in viral cane video, has prior arrest record." Marvin read the article in 40 seconds. It referenced a 12-year-old arrest, described in deliberate, vague language that implied violence and instability. It did not mention that the charges had been dismissed the same week. It did not mention that Joseph had intervened to protect a student from an attacker outside his own school. It did not mention the commendation the school board had issued him the following year. It was a clean hit. Surgical. Designed to do maximum damage with minimum facts. Fenton's office. Had to be. He stood on that Bronx sidewalk and read the comment section for 30 seconds, enough to see the damage already spreading, and then put his phone away because reading further would not help anything. He pulled out his legal pad instead. Beneath Thomas Rupert's name, he wrote 2 words and underlined them both: systemic, deliberate. This wasn't one officer with a bad temper. This was a machine, built piece by piece over years, designed to hurt people and then hurt them again when they tried to say something about it. He uncapped his pen and wrote the second name on the list: Cassandra Reyes. Washington Heights was 40 minutes from the Bronx by subway, and Marvin spent the ride with his legal pad open on his knee, reviewing his notes from Thomas Rupert's apartment. He read them twice. Then he closed the pad and watched the city move past the windows in the dark tunnel and thought about what a machine looks like when you're standing inside it. It looks like nothing. That's the point. It looks like paperwork and phone calls and legal language and unfortunate coincidences. It looks like a daughter's employer getting a routine inquiry. It looks like a witness who simply changed her mind. It only looks like a machine when you step back far enough to see all the pieces moving together. Marvin was stepping back. Reverend Luther had called ahead. When Marvin knocked on the door of Cassandra Reyes's apartment on 181st Street, it opened within seconds. No chain, no hesitation. Cassandra Reyes was 58 years old, small and sharp-eyed, with the kind of stillness about her that suggested she'd been holding something in for a long time, and was very tired of holding it. "Come in," she said. "I've been waiting for someone to come." The apartment smelled like coffee and candle wax. A large wooden cross hung above the kitchen doorway. On the table, before Marvin had even sat down, there was already a manila folder. Thick, organized. He looked at it, then at her. 18 months, she said, sitting across from him and folding her hands on top of the folder. I have been waiting 18 months for someone to sit in that chair. She told it straight, without drama, in the manner of a woman who had rehearsed the telling so many times it had worn smooth. Millward had stopped her on a Tuesday evening, 17 months ago, half a block from First Missionary Baptist, where she sang in the choir. She'd been carrying her sheet music. She was running 3 minutes late and walking quickly, and Millward had stepped out of his cruiser and told her to slow down. She slowed down. She asked politely what the problem was. "Problem is, you're acting suspicious," Millward had told her. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" she explained. "Choir rehearsal. Half a block." She even pointed at the church. Millward made her stand on that sidewalk for 22 minutes. He ran her ID. He asked her the same questions multiple times in slightly different orders, the way people do when they're hoping to catch a contradiction. He went through her choir bag. He held up her sheet music and looked at it like it might be something else entirely. "He wasn't looking for anything," Cassandra said. "He was just making sure I knew I could be stopped, that I could be made to stand there, that there was nothing I could do about it." When she finally reached the church, she was shaking so badly that Reverend Luther had sat with her for 20 minutes before she could sing a note. She filed the complaint the next morning. 2 weeks later, a man called her cell phone. He introduced himself as an immigration attorney. He told her, in a sympathetic and professional voice, that he'd become aware of her situation through community channels and wanted to offer guidance. He told her that pursuing civil action against the police department could complicate her pending citizenship application, flag her file, create delays, attract scrutiny she didn't want. She thanked him and withdrew the complaint that same afternoon. Marvin looked up from his notepad. "Did he give you his name?" Cassandra opened the folder. "He gave me his card," she said. "I kept everything." She slid a business card across the table. Marvin picked it up. The name on it meant nothing to him yet. But that evening, sitting in his father's kitchen with his laptop open, it would mean everything. The attorney had no established immigration practice. His firm's website had been registered 8 months before Cassandra's complaint was filed. And buried in the public records of the city's outside legal counsel contracts was a retainer agreement. The same firm, hired 2 months before Cassandra ever picked up a phone to file her complaint. They had been ready, waiting, a tool already built, sitting in a drawer, ready to be used on whoever needed silencing next. Marvin set the business card down on the table carefully, the way you set down something you don't want to damage. "Ms. Reyes," he said, "can I ask, why did you keep all of this?" Cassandra looked at him with those sharp, tired eyes. "Because I knew," she said simply. "I knew somebody would come eventually." She glanced at the folder. "I just needed to make sure that when they did, I had everything they needed to finish it." Marvin pulled out his phone and called Jamie Hennard. Jamie Hennard filed the federal civil rights complaint on a Thursday morning. It was 41 pages long. It named Nicholas Millward as the primary subject, cited his 3 known prior complaints as evidence of a documented pattern of racially motivated misconduct, and identified the destruction of the booking area security footage as deliberate obstruction. It named Captain Gordon Norwell as a facilitating party. It requested that the DOJ's Civil Rights Division open a formal investigation under federal statute. Jamie had been building toward a filing like this for 20 years. Every word in those 41 pages was chosen the way a surgeon chooses an instrument, precisely, purposefully, with full knowledge of what it was going to cut. She sent it at 9:04 a.m. By noon, Adrian Washington called her back. A preliminary inquiry was open. The news broke on a Friday. By Saturday morning, it had moved from local outlets to national ones, and by Saturday afternoon, a prominent civil rights organization had announced a rally outside the 28th Precinct for Sunday at 2 o'clock. Marvin told his father about the inquiry that Saturday evening. Joseph was in his armchair, hands on his knees, face toward the window. "Things are moving," Marvin said. Joseph was quiet for a moment. His thumb moved slowly across the arm of the chair. "How fast?" "Fast enough." Joseph nodded once. His hand moved to the coffee table, where the 2 pieces of Regina's cane still lay side by side. He rested his fingers on the mahogany handle. "Don't stop moving, son," he said. Marvin didn't. Sunday came in cold and bright. Marvin stayed home with his father. He didn't want Joseph anywhere near that precinct. Not yet. Not until something more permanent than a rally had been secured. But Reverend Luther was there, and Jamie Hennard was there, and that was enough. The crowd was larger than anyone had officially expected. 300 people, maybe more, spreading out across the sidewalk and into the street, until a pair of traffic officers had to redirect cars around the block. Hand-painted signs, a sound system someone had hauled in on a dolly, camera crews from 4 local stations and 1 national affiliate. A photographer captured an image that would run in 7 newspapers by Monday morning. A large framed photograph of Joseph held up at the front of the crowd, showing him on the precinct steps the day of his release, holding the evidence bag against his chest, his face lifted slightly as though listening for something just beyond what the rest of them could hear. Whoever had printed it had done so large enough that his expression was unmistakable. Dignity. Unbroken and unbowed. That photograph became the face of everything that followed. Reverend Luther took the makeshift podium, a milk crate with a microphone stand, and spoke for 12 minutes without notes. She named names. She cited dates. She told Thomas Rupert's story without using his name, and she told Cassandra's story without using hers, and she told Joseph's story using every detail, because Joseph had given his permission for every detail to be used. "They thought breaking his cane would break him," she said, her voice carrying clean and clear over the crowd. "They do not know Joseph Desmond." The crowd answered her. Jamie Hennard followed. She was brief and precise in the way that landing a punch is brief and precise. She confirmed the federal inquiry. She stated that the city's settlement offer had been rejected. She said the word accountability 4 times and meant it differently each time. Meanwhile, Captain Gordon Norwell sat in a chair before the precinct's Civilian Oversight Board and performed the role he had spent 30 years perfecting. He was cooperative. He was concerned. He expressed deep commitment to community trust and departmental transparency. He used the word thorough 6 times and looked each board member in the eye when he said it. He answered every question fully and revealed nothing. The board thanked him for his time. Norwell drove back to the precinct, went up to his office, and closed the door. He sat at his desk for a few minutes, very still, looking at nothing in particular. Then he opened his laptop and began drafting a memo to his administrative staff about updated internal record-keeping procedures. He was 3 moves ahead. He had always been 3 moves ahead. He just didn't know that Marvin Desmond wasn't playing the same game he was. That evening, the mayor's office issued a public statement calling for a full departmental review and expressing commitment to ensuring all residents of New York City were treated with dignity and respect. Marvin read it on his phone and set the phone face down on the table. Some words meant something. Some words were weather. A lot of sound and motion that changed nothing on the ground. He picked his legal pad back up and kept working. 3 days after the rally, a judge ruled the bystander video inadmissible. The ruling came down on a Wednesday morning, buried in procedural language about the filming of on-duty city employees without departmental consent. Fenton's legal team had been working that angle for weeks, hunting for the right judge, the right argument, the right moment to file. They found all 3. The ruling didn't kill the civil case outright, but it ripped the heart out of it. The video, the 47 seconds that had been seen by over 1 million people, the thing that had started all of this, could not be used in a courtroom. The most powerful piece of evidence Joseph Desmond had was now off the table. Jamie Hennard called Marvin at 8 in the morning and gave it to him straight, the way she always did. No softening, no false comfort, just the facts, clean and hard. Marvin thanked her and hung up. He sat at his father's kitchen table and wrote the ruling down on his legal pad, word for word, the way his father had taught him to write down things that were difficult. If you write it down, Joseph used to say, it can't sneak up on you twice. He stared at what he'd written. Then he turned to the next page and kept working. The second blow came that afternoon. Thomas Rupert called. Marvin knew from the first syllable, the particular heaviness of it, the way a man sounds when he has made a decision that costs him something real. "I can't do it," Thomas said. "I'm sorry, Marvin. I'm so sorry." "What happened?" A long pause. "They called my son's job this time." His voice was very quiet. "Not my daughter. My son. Different employer. Different city. Different state. They found him anyway." Another pause. "He called me this morning asking if he was going to be fired. He has 3 kids, Marvin. He just bought a house." Marvin closed his eyes. "Thomas." "I'm sorry," Thomas said again. "I am so sorry about your father. I mean that with everything I have. But I can't be the reason my son loses everything he's built." His voice cracked, just slightly, at the edges. "I hope you understand." "I understand," Marvin said. And he did. That was the worst part. He understood completely. The line went quiet. Thomas Rupert hung up. Marvin set the phone on the table and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. The third blow fell that evening. Adrienne Washington called at 6:47 p.m. Marvin knew from the way she said his name. Not her official voice, not her DOJ voice, but her personal one. The one she used when she was about to tell him something she hated having to say. "The preliminary inquiry has been administratively paused," she said. "That's the official language." Marvin was quiet. "It came from above me," she continued. "Someone in the city's congressional delegation made a call. I don't know exactly who picked up. I don't have that information. What I know is that the inquiry is finished, and I cannot reopen it without authorization I am not going to receive." A pause. "Marvin, I am furious. I want you to know that. I am absolutely furious, and I am powerless." "I know," he said. "Thank you for calling me yourself." "Be careful," she said. "Please." She hung up. Marvin sat with the phone in his hand and thought about the machine, the way it worked, the way it reached into every room, every office, every jurisdiction, and made itself felt without ever showing its face. A congressional phone call, a son's employer in another state, a sympathetic judge on a procedural technicality. None of it visible. All of it devastating. There was one more thing. Millward's police union attorney had filed a formal harassment complaint against an unknown civilian interfering with civil witnesses. The description in the filing was detailed enough that Marvin's own supervisor at the New York FBI field office had been quietly notified. His supervisor called at 7:30. The conversation was short and not kind. Marvin had 48 hours to demonstrate that his personal conduct had not compromised the Bureau's integrity. He had no federal hook, no jurisdiction, no video, no witnesses, no inquiry. He had a father and a broken cane and a yellow legal pad. He ended up in Marvin Garvey Park, sitting on a bench as the sun went down behind the buildings and the sky turned the color of old brick. He sat there for a long time without moving. Then he called his father. Joseph picked up on the second ring. "Marvin, are you there?" "I'm here, Dad." A pause. Not empty, full of something. The kind of quiet that two people share when words aren't quite big enough yet. "Good," Joseph said. "Then we're not done yet." Marvin looked up at the darkening sky. "No," he said. "We're not." Marvin got back to the apartment at 9 o'clock. His father was asleep in the armchair, chin dipped slightly toward his chest, hands folded in his lap the way they always were when Joseph slept sitting up. The lamp in the corner was on. The broken cane pieces were still on the coffee table. Marvin stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at his father in the lamplight, at the good jacket still on his shoulders, at the lines in his face that hadn't been there 6 years ago, at the stillness of a man who had earned his rest 10 times over and kept being denied it. He went to the kitchen. He made coffee. He sat down at the table with the yellow legal pad and a pen, and he started over from the very beginning. Not as an agent, not as a son, as a man who had spent 20 years learning to find the thing that everyone else had walked past without seeing, the thread that looked like nothing until you pulled it. And then the whole thing came apart. He wrote down everything he knew in the order that he knew it. The arrest. The charges dropped. The cover-up. The witnesses recanted. The footage flagged as corrupted. The settlement offer. The smear article. Thomas Rupert. Cassandra Reyes. The fraudulent immigration attorney. The congressional phone call. The union harassment complaint. He read it all back slowly. Then he stopped. He went back to one line. Footage flagged as corrupted. He stared at it. He knew secure watch systems. Not personally, professionally. The FBI used a different vendor for their own secure storage, but SecureWatch had come up in a federal contracting audit 3 years ago that Marvin had been peripherally involved in. He knew how their system worked. He knew its architecture. Cloud-based government contract storage systems did not corrupt the way Norwell had described. True corruption on a cloud server, the kind that made footage unrecoverable, left a specific signature. It came from hardware failure or data transfer errors, And it degraded footage gradually, frame by frame. It looked a particular way. More importantly, it happened to the footage itself. It did not happen to the access logs. The logs were stored separately, on redundant servers, precisely because the city's contract with SecureWatch required an unbroken chain of custody for all recorded material. Marvin sat forward. If someone had accessed that footage and deleted it deliberately, that deletion would be recorded in the access log. A user account, a timestamp, a specific terminal. Cloud deletion, the kind that looks like corruption if nobody checks too carefully, was not true deletion. Not under a system like SecureWatch. Under the city's contract, deleted footage was held in a recoverable state on SecureWatch's backup servers for 30 days before permanent removal. He looked at the calendar on his phone. 26 days since the arrest. 4 days left in the recovery window. He sat very still for a moment. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. From the living room, he could hear his father breathing in slow and even measures. Destroying records on a municipal government contract system was not a local police matter. Municipal contracts with federal compliance requirements fell under federal records statutes. Deliberately deleting secured government footage wasn't evidence tampering in a civil case. It was a federal crime. Specifically, it was a violation of 18 U.S.C. Par 1519, destruction of records in a federal investigation. Marvin couldn't open a civil rights investigation. He had no jurisdiction over local police misconduct. He had been told that in 4 different ways by 4 different people over the past 2 weeks. But he absolutely could report a federal records destruction violation to the FBI Cyber Division. That was not personal. That was not overreach. That was a citizen, any citizen, FBI agent or not, reporting a federal crime through the correct channel. He looked at the clock on the microwave. 2:04 a.m. The Cyber Division had a 24-hour reporting line for federal records violations. It was designed for corporate whistleblowers and government contractors. Nobody had ever used it the way Marvin was about to use it. He picked up his phone. He sat with it in his hand for a moment, thinking about what his father had said. The law is a tool. You know how it can be used right and how it can be used wrong. Norwell had used it wrong for 30 years. He'd used it like a weapon. Blunt, indiscriminate, designed to hurt and silence and protect the people who deserved no protection. Marvin dialed. The line rang twice. Federal Records Violation Reporting, a voice said. Go ahead. Marvin Desmond took a breath. I need to report a federal records destruction violation, he said. I have reason to believe a government contract storage system has been deliberately accessed and manipulated to destroy evidence. I have the vendor name, the contract number, and the access window. And I need you to move fast, because there are 4 days left before the backup expires. He began to talk. And this time, nobody stopped him. The FBI Cyber Division did not move the way civil rights inquiries moved. It did not wait for political winds to shift. It did not pause for congressional phone calls. It did not hold preliminary meetings about whether to hold preliminary meetings. It moved the way federal agencies move when the violation is clean, the statute is clear, and the evidence window is closing. Within 48 hours of Marvin's call, investigators had subpoenaed SecureWatch systems for the complete access logs covering every interaction with the 28th Precinct's booking area footage from the date of Joseph's arrest forward. SecureWatch's legal team complied by 10 o'clock the following morning. Marvin was at his father's kitchen table when his contact at the Cyber Division called him with the preliminary findings. He had been awake since before sunrise, working the legal pad, running calculations on the recovery window in the margins. The logs are clean, his contact said. No corruption signature, no hardware failure, no data transfer error. Marvin closed his eyes briefly. Accessed and deleted. Deliberately. Specific user account. Registered to the 28th Precinct Administrative System. The deletion was performed from a terminal inside the precinct building. A pause. The account belongs to a Captain Gordon Norwell. The kitchen was very quiet. And the footage? Marvin asked. Secure Watch runs a 30-day backup protocol on all government contract storage. It's written into their city agreement. The footage was not permanently destroyed. Another pause, this one with something different in it. We recovered it this morning. Marvin set his pen down on the legal pad. He pressed his hand flat on the table and breathed. How bad is it? He asked. You'll want to sit down when you watch it, his contact said. You're already sitting down, right? I am. Stay sitting. The recovered footage ran for 14 minutes and 22 seconds. Marvin watched it alone on his laptop at the kitchen table, with the volume low so it wouldn't wake his father. He watched it once straight through without stopping. Then he closed the laptop and sat with his hands folded and stared at the wall for a long time. The footage showed Nicholas Millward inside the booking area maybe 20 minutes after Joseph had been processed. He was relaxed, comfortable. He stood near the far wall with two other officers and Osmar, and he was performing. There was no other word for it. He held up both hands and let his eyes go vacant, and stumbled slightly, mocking the walk of a blind man. His mouth was moving. The audio was clear. What came out of it was not fit for any public record, but it was on the record now, preserved in federal evidence, and it would not be going anywhere. The two other officers were laughing. Osmar made a sound that was trying to be a laugh and couldn't quite get there. His eyes moved to the door twice, and then, at the 11-minute mark, Captain Gordon Norwell walked through the booking area. He slowed. He looked at Millward. He looked at what Millward was doing. He stood there for 4 full seconds, which Marvin counted. Then he kept walking. He went through the far door without a word, without a gesture, without a single indication that what he had just witnessed was anything other than acceptable. 4 seconds. 30 years of authority. And he kept walking. Marvin opened the laptop again and watched those 4 seconds 3 more times. While the cyber division was working, Jamie Hennard's emergency motion regarding the fraudulent immigration attorney was heard by a different judge, one Paula Fenton had not anticipated. The motion was granted before noon. The attorney's communications were subpoenaed. What came back was comprehensive and damning. A paper trail connecting him directly to the city's outside legal counsel firm, a retainer that predated Cassandra's complaint by 2 months, and a series of text messages that used careful coded language that nonetheless described exactly what it was. A coordinated effort to discourage a witness from pursuing a civil rights complaint against a city employee. It was witness tampering. It was documented. And it was now in Jamie Hennard's hands. When Cassandra Reyes received the call from Jamie Hennard explaining that her testimony was now legally protected and that the man who had silenced her was facing his own legal exposure, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When do you need me?" "As soon as you can get here," Jamie said. Cassandra was at Jamie Hennard's office within the hour. She sat down across the desk and placed her manila folder on top. Every text, every voicemail, every document, organized in chronological order and paper-clipped by category. She was not frightened anymore. She was something else entirely. Something that had been building for 18 months in a quiet apartment in Washington Heights, waiting for exactly this moment. Jamie Hennard's phone rang. It was Marvin. She listened for 30 seconds. Then she said, "Cassandra is in. Thomas will follow when he hears about Norwell. Marvin, the footage is the case. It's over for them." She hung up and looked at Cassandra across the desk. "Let's get to work," she said. Thomas Rupert called at 7:52 in the morning. Marvin was already awake, already at the kitchen table, already on his second cup of coffee. He'd barely slept. Not from anxiety, from momentum. The kind of momentum that builds in the final stretch of something long and hard, when the finish line is close enough to feel, but still far enough to lose. He picked up on the first ring. "I heard," Thomas said. There was something different in his voice. The heaviness was still there, that never fully left a man. But underneath it was something else. Something that had straightened up. "Somebody from the community called me last night. Said there were federal charges coming for Norwell." "That's right," Marvin said. A long breath on the other end of the line. "And Millward?" "Full FBI civil rights investigation, federal charges under 18 U.S.C. 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law." Marvin paused. "That carries prison time, Thomas. Real prison time." The line was quiet for a moment. "Tell me where to sign," Thomas Rupert said. Marvin felt something release in his chest. Quiet and clean. Like a knot finally worked loose. "I'll have Jamie Hennard's office contact you by noon." "I'll be here," Thomas said. "I'm not going anywhere." He hung up. Marvin set the phone down and looked at the window. The morning was gray and cold outside, the kind of October morning that meant business. He wrote Thomas Rupert's name on the legal pad and drew a clean line under it. The federal records destruction charges against Captain Gordon Norwell were filed formally at 9:15 that Wednesday morning. The paperwork named him specifically: his user account, his terminal, his timestamp, his deliberate access and deletion of secured government contract footage. There was no ambiguity in the language. There was no room for the careful, polished performance he had spent 30 years perfecting in boardrooms and oversight hearings. The federal charging document did not care about his silver hair, or his measured voice, or his practiced expressions of institutional concern. It only cared about 7:42 p.m., and what he had done at 7:42 p.m. was on the record. Norwell was placed on unpaid administrative leave pending prosecution. Reverend Charlotte Luther received a quiet phone call from Marvin at 8 that morning. Just the time, just the location, just the words. They're walking him out at 9. She made 4 calls after that. By 8:50, 2 news cameras and a local radio reporter were positioned on the sidewalk outside the 28th precinct. At 9:22 a.m., Captain Gordon Norwell walked out of the building he had commanded for 11 years, flanked by 2 federal investigators. He was not in handcuffs. The arraignment would come later, but the investigators were close on either side of him, and the space between them was small enough that it made the point clearly. He did not look at the cameras. He looked straight ahead at nothing, that careful, revealing nothing, and walked to the waiting vehicle with the particular stiffness of a man who knows exactly how this moment is going to look in print and cannot do a single thing about it. The cameras rolled. The radio reporter called it in live. Reverend Luther stood on the sidewalk with her arms folded and watched him go. She didn't cheer. She didn't speak. She just watched, with the steady eyes of a woman who had buried 3 members of her congregation while waiting for this kind of mourning. Nicholas Millward was suspended without pay the same afternoon. His union attorney, a man who had successfully defended Millward against 3 prior complaints, who had filed harassment complaints and drafted settlement agreements and made problems disappear with remarkable efficiency, received a copy of the recovered booking footage at 11 o'clock that morning, sent by the Cyber Division as part of standard evidence disclosure. He watched it, all 14 minutes and 22 seconds of it. He called Millward at noon and told him he was withdrawing from the case, effective immediately, citing an irreconcilable conflict of interest. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Millward called back 4 times. The attorney did not pick up. Officer Randy Osmar sat in an interview room at the Federal Building on Broadway that same afternoon and told investigators everything. He told it in the manner of a man who had been waiting for someone to ask, someone with actual authority to do something with the answer. He confirmed the pattern, the culture, the things that happened inside the 28th precinct that everyone saw and nobody said, because saying it meant becoming the next problem that needed to be managed. His cooperation was noted. His testimony was sworn. Marvin sat in his father's apartment that evening and watched the news footage of Norwell being walked out. Small on his phone screen, silent with the volume off, but clear. He watched it once. Then he sent his father a text message. "It's moving, Dad." Joseph's reply came 30 seconds later, which meant he'd had Reverend Luther help him set up the voice-to-text again. "I know, son. I can feel it." Paula Fenton resigned on a Friday morning. The resignation letter was 2 paragraphs long and cited personal reasons in the careful, non-committal language of a woman who had spent 26 years constructing exits before she ever walked into a room. It was submitted to the mayor's office at 8:47 a.m. and leaked to 3 news outlets by noon. Not by Fenton, but by someone in the mayor's office who understood that a quiet resignation was better managed as a public narrative than as a discovered secret. The story ran under headlines about her legacy of public service, her years of dedication, her commitment to the city. Jamie Hennard read the headline on her phone, set it face down on her desk, and went back to drafting the bar complaint she had been building for 9 days. The resignation did not change the complaint. The complaint did not care about the resignation. It laid out, in 37 pages of documented evidence, how Paula Fenton had known about the fraudulent immigration attorney's contact with Cassandra Reyes, how her office had coordinated the outreach to Thomas Rupert's family members as a pressure strategy, and how she had directed the city's legal response in a manner designed to obstruct legitimate civil rights complaints rather than address them. Jamie filed it at 2:15 that same afternoon. The city's new lead counsel, a careful man named Gerard William, who had been handed a burning building and told to put it out with his bare hands, called Jamie Hennard at 4 o'clock. He did not begin with pleasantries. "We'd like to discuss resolution," he said. "I'm listening," Jamie said. "The city is prepared to offer a substantial settlement. We believe—" "How substantial?" A pause. $400,000. Jamie wrote the number down. "No." Another pause, longer this time. "Ms. Hennard, a trial would be—" "Mr. William," Jamie said evenly, "you have recovered booking footage showing your officer mocking a blind man inside a police precinct while his commanding officer watched and walked away. You have documented evidence of a coordinated witness intimidation campaign conducted through your own outside counsel. You have a federal records destruction charge against a sitting captain. And you have the full attention of national media." She let that sit for a moment. "You do not want this to go to trial." The negotiation took 4 days. Marvin sat with his father on the 3rd evening, both of them at the kitchen table, and walked him through the numbers that were being discussed. Joseph listened without interrupting, his hands folded, his face toward the window. When Marvin finished, Joseph said, "What do they want in return?" "A confidentiality clause," Marvin said. "Standard language. You agree not to speak publicly about the terms." The apartment was quiet for a long moment. Joseph unfolded his hands and placed them flat on the table. "No," he said. "This happened. It happened to me, and it happened to Thomas Rupert, and it happened to Cassandra Reyes, and it happened to people whose names we never found." He paused. "Let it be on the record. All of it." Marvin looked at his father for a moment. "I'll call Jamie," he said. The final agreement was signed on a Thursday. $1.4 million. No confidentiality provisions. Public record. Filed with the court. Accessible to anyone who wanted to find it. Jamie Hennard held a press conference on the courthouse steps that afternoon. She read the settlement figure into the microphone in a clear, steady voice and watched the reporters write it down. She confirmed that the city had agreed to a full independent review of the 28th Precinct's complaint handling procedures going back 10 years. She confirmed that Officer Nicholas Millward remained under federal criminal investigation and had not been reinstated. She confirmed that Captain Gordon Norwell's arraignment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The original viral video, its courtroom admissibility no longer relevant, was reshared across every platform that afternoon, alongside the recovered booking footage which the Cyber Division had cleared for public release as part of the federal record. 14 minutes and 22 seconds of Nicholas Millward inside a police precinct, performing his cruelty for an audience that laughed, while a man who had done nothing wrong sat somewhere in that building holding the 2 pieces of what his wife had made for him. The internet watched it in silence. Then it did not stay silent. That evening, Marvin made dinner. Nothing elaborate. Rice, chicken, the green beans his father liked. Joseph sat at the kitchen table and listened to the sounds of the apartment with the comfortable attention of a man who had learned to read the world through his ears. When the food was on the table, he reached for his fork and said, "What happens to Millward now?" "Federal prosecution," Marvin said. "Prison time is possible." Joseph nodded. "Once. Deliberate." "Good," he said. He reached for the salt. His hand moved across the table without hesitation. Easy, certain, knowing exactly where everything was. Some things, Marvin thought, watching his father's hand, could not be taken, no matter how hard someone tried. Marvin found the craftsman through a specialty adaptive equipment supplier in Brooklyn, a retired woodworker named Earl who had spent 40 years making custom mobility aids and had never once rushed a job. Marvin had brought him the broken pieces 3 weeks ago. Both of them, the shaft and the handle, still in the evidence bag. Earl had held the mahogany handle for a long time without speaking, turning it slowly, reading it with his hands the way Joseph read the world. Then he'd looked up and said, "I can't make it the same, but I can make it right." Marvin had said, "That's all I'm asking." On a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the federal charges were filed, Marvin arrived at his father's apartment with the new cane wrapped in brown paper and tied with a piece of twine. He set it on the coffee table, the same coffee table where the broken pieces had lived for over a month. The broken pieces were gone now. Marvin had moved them to a shoebox in the closet, carefully, the night before. He wasn't ready to throw them away. He didn't think he ever would be. Joseph heard the paper on the table. His head tilted slightly. "What's that?" "Open it," Marvin said. Joseph leaned forward and found the package with his hands. He worked the twine loose slowly, pulled back the paper, and his fingers found the cane. He was quiet for a long moment, hands moving along the shaft, up to the handle. The mahogany was new, lighter in color, not yet worn to the deep warmth of Regina's, not yet shaped by years of a particular grip. But the fit was right. Earl had measured from the broken handle. He'd matched the weight, the balance, the exact diameter where Joseph's thumb met his fingers. Joseph held it and didn't speak. "It's not hers," Marvin said. "I know that." Joseph ran his thumb along the handle once, twice. Then he settled back in the chair with the cane resting across his knees and his hands folded over it. "She'd have liked that you tried," he said. They sat together for a while after that. The apartment did what it always did, held them in its particular quiet, the jazz station low on the radio, the sounds of 118th Street coming up through the window. Marvin drank coffee. Joseph rested. Neither of them needed to fill the silence with anything. Then Joseph said, "You ready to walk?" They went downstairs together, side by side in the elevator, out through the lobby and into the October morning. The air was sharp and clean. Joseph stepped onto the sidewalk and set the cane. He squared his shoulders. He smoothed his lapels with his free hand, the good jacket, the navy one with the brass buttons, the third hanger from the left. Marvin watched him do it and felt something very large and very quiet move through his chest. They turned toward 125th Street. What Reverend Luther had arranged, and had not fully warned them about, revealed itself as they rounded the corner. The block was full of people. Not a crowd in the rally sense, not signs and sound systems and news cameras on tripods. Something different. Something that had assembled itself out of love rather than logistics. Neighbors standing on their stoops. Families on the sidewalk. Former students of Joseph's, men and women in their 40s and 50s, gray at their temples, who had driven from New Jersey and Connecticut and Long Island to be on this particular block, on this particular morning. Clarence, the fruit vendor, stood in front of his cart, with his apples arranged in neat rows and his hands at his sides. The woman in the green coat, the one who had shouted the day of the arrest, stood near the corner. The barber shop owner stood outside his open door with his arms folded and his chin up. A hand-painted banner stretched between two lampposts. White letters on blue. Joseph Desmond walked here first. Joseph couldn't see any of it, but he heard it. The applause started near the front, someone near the corner who couldn't hold it anymore, and then moved down the block like a wave, building as it went, until the whole street was giving it back to him. Joseph stopped walking. He stood very still for a moment. Then he lifted his face toward the sound, the way a man turns his face toward the sun after a winter that lasted too long. His eyes were closed behind his dark glasses. His hand was steady on the new cane. His shoulders were back. His chin was up. He was not a victim standing on that sidewalk. He had never been a victim. He was Joseph James Desmond, retired principal, husband of Regina, father of Marvin, resident of this neighborhood for 41 years, and he was home. Marvin stood beside his father and did not speak. There were no words equal to the moment. He just stood there, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and watched the block give his father back his street. Joseph took one breath, then another. Then his cane swept forward, measured, confident, certain, and Joseph James Desmond walked his Tuesday route. Every crack in the sidewalk exactly where he remembered, every uneven curb, the fruit stand, the barber shop, the pharmacy on 125th, all of it his, all of it still there, all of it waiting. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.